Let you guys watch the video Khan Academy KAHN on this particular piece, Hannah Hawk. This is really important, okay? Make sure you watch that video because the Dadaism really explains a lot of the 20th century shift to disjointed imagery, some of the Cubism and so on. This is not Cubism, this is Dadaism. There's a lot of isms in that early 20th century. There's a lot of changes in the world. A lot to do with the camera listed here, Industrial Revolution in World War I. A lot of people think it's World War II, but World War I was the first war where overhead bombs were dropped on people. We did not have planes in any kind of real, meaningful way. We had a few odd planes, but airplanes in a heavy way used militaristically. That's World War One, so it's a big deal and it's very upsetting, and it shifts the perception of the world. Definitely, it's a big change. Industrial Revolution also adds a lot of noise and mechanization into the world where previously everything was rural and agricultural. So this is going to explain a lot to you if you watch that video, and also just keep this in mind. It's very powerful, these three things: the camera, Industrial Revolution, and World War I. Okay? So they're going to explain this disjointed imagery. All right, a radiogram, I talked about this a little bit. This is basically like an X-ray in that when it's exposed, when you would make an image, you would use something from the camera. You'd use the negative that you took of an object or a person or whatever, and you project it onto paper. Well, this is basically the paper and the exposure of the light without using an image. So he just used objects, and that's Man Ray, very experimental artist, also a Dadaist and sometimes a Surrealist. Film. Okay, here we go. Film is a really big shift, and moving film, the origins are the horse galloping, and it's kind of hard to explain how this happened, but there was a bet to see if a horse actually ever had all four legs off the ground. I kind of feel like you could have seen that without doing this trick, but if this hadn't happened, we wouldn't have film as we know it. Sorry about that. So what he did is there's these little strings that you can't see that would trigger the camera to shoot an image, a moving image, an image while this animal is in motion. So you have all these different images here. You have 16 of them. And this is really the beginning of motion pictures, the idea that you're going to watch continuous motion of something. Okay, he did some other studies with this, and then there was a way, to put it in a strip through a camera, a projector, and have a moving image. And there's 3 different things I loaded, or 4, I think, and watch all those different film clips. They're very short. So that's not real motion. What it is it's just a bunch of still images projected. 24 frames a second, giving the illusion of continuous action. It's your eye putting all those images together, and it seems like it's moving. Celluloid film. This was one of the first inventions of early film. Very flammable. It's no longer used. It's changed quite a bit. So this was the material that they strung through the camera and then later the projector once it was developed. Trip to the Moon, that is on your video list. I'm going to let you watch that. Animation, same thing, same development. A little bit later, illustrations instead of live people and so on. So there's just the storyboard and the drawings. You would just take pictures of the drawings consecutively. Okay, so 12 to 24 drawings needed per second, same as film, to create an illusion of smooth motion. Okay, editing is really important. We'll get into that in a second. This is a storyboard, not in your book, but this is Alfred Hitchcock's storyboard. Many film directors do this kind of storyboarding. It comes from animation, but it's very useful to a filmmaker. This is for the birds, and this is kind of setting up what film shots the director wants, okay? Actually, I think we're going top to bottom, okay? here we go, yeah, 1717, yeah, here we go. We're going down here, and it's going back and forth. So there's a lot of editing going to happen, but the continuous shot of this camera, one camera is here, here, you know, and so on here. One camera's on her, and then a third camera might be off on top of the house, and then the editing is going to bring this all together. Film and art, very important to think about this. The Hollywood movies, for the most part, the popular culture, and anymore, this popular culture versus fine art delineation gets fuzzy. But cinematic movies are not considered art in the same way that some of these auteur-driven movies are. An auteur is just an author or a director whose films are marked by consistent and visual style. Hitchcock is an auteur. Okay, you can recognize his films. Warhol is not exactly an auteur. He's an artist making films that are experimental. So he's an experimental filmmaker. He is not a new wave filmmaker. Don't get confused. The book is not super clear on that. Jean-Luc Godard is one of the French new wave, nouvelle vague, new wave cinema auteurs. Jean Seberg right here, she's actually an American actress working in France, but Jean-Paul Belmondo, Jean Seberg are showing the ideals of the look of that time, 1960. They're live on the street. Some of this is unpermitted, unset up shots where they're just walking down the street live. Very unusual, very different compared to like a Gone with the Wind situation where heavy sets, heavy, you know, control over everything. Okay, the editing is a big part. All right, I'm gonna skip ahead. I don't want to skip ahead. Editing is a big part of how auteurism and how new wave cinema is defined. Editing here is very jump cut. It's very it's kind of wild, and it's also a lot of talking over one another. That's also a new wave technique. And cinema verite, you want to keep that in mind. That is to do with real life cinema. This isn't, this isn't exact, or truth in cinema. This isn't quite exactly cinema verite. More cinema verite does not include actors. But he's using parts of that technique. It's a little confusing in the book, but you just kind of walk up to people and start talking to them, and that's your film. Okay, very experimental, very unusual. All right, we're going to get into video. You need to watch Peter Campus. Actually, I'm going to backtrack. The Breathless is the full movie that I put in there. You do not need to watch the whole thing, but get a sense of the jump cuts. Video, Peter Campus is one of the beginning auteurs, or I would say, that I don't want to confuse the term, one of the beginning artists using a video camera. So it's a different way of making images. It's electronic signals, and they're transferred to a monitor. This was not a way to store things initially. It was just basically a way to transmit television, and then it became digital video, which is stored digitally on a disk, and we all know about this at this point. All right, internet is another type of net art. I'm not going to get too into that because there's not much about this on any of our quizzes, but a lot of people are experimenting, and there's a few examples in the book. This is one, Olia Lialina. I have a hard time with her name. And you can actually log on to this link up here if you wish to and just take a look at that. But she is playing around with the medium, and there's no ground here. She's done some manipulation here. It's kind of interesting. Camera and computer arts, you guys have all these definitions listed on the other PowerPoint. I'll leave you those. Okay, that's